All right, good morning, everyone. Looking forward to learning with everyone. Can you hear me?
Mhm. Yes.
Awesome. All right, we have the privilege of learning the Haftarah of Parashat Lecha, which can be found in the back of the Stone Chumash on 1133. I have it written still from last year. It is from Yeshayahu, from Isaiah, chapter 40, the end, chapter 40, verse 27 through 41:16. And what we have is the end of what is the very famous chapter of Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. That's where it ends, at the very end of it. And what we want to do is look through the Haftarah. Obviously, it is an engagement on the story of Lech Lecha, of the Parsha of Abraham. And we're going to look at both at the Haftarah and through that. Really, from this chapter through the end of the book, we get many prophecies of consolation, of Nechama. Yeshayahu is sort of partly destruction, partly consolation. In particular, part of what's happening over here is Koresh is going to give permission for the Jewish people to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash and restore the different. We'll come back to that. And we saw that.
Can you repeat the page number?
1133, I believe.
Okay, I didn't hear it right. Thank you. Okay.
So let's look at it. It's really the end of one part and the continuing of the other, or the end of one part and the beginning of a new one. So it starts verse 27. So the very end, Lama Tomar Yaakov. Part of what the message that we're presenting over here, as we'll see in the broader context, why this is important, is that the relationship between God and the Jewish people is not severed. Despite destruction, but despite all the challenges, the relationship is not severed. Lama Tomar Yaakov Tidaber Yisrael. Why should Yaakov say and Yisrael and the Jewish people speak? Nistra Darchei Hashem, that the ways of God have been hidden, from being cut off from us. Ume Elohai, and from our God, Mishpati Ya'avor, has caused everything to turn away. Halo Yadata, Imlo Shamata, haven't you heard? Don't you know? Elohei Olam, that God is the eternal God, Hashem. Borei Ksot Haaretz, that God created the whole world from end to end. Lo Yaifu, Lo Yagiu, Ve'ein Cheker L'Tvunato. God doesn't get weak or tired. It's not like God runs out of energy with the people. God's his energy is boundless. Hanosin La'ef Koach, God gives strength even to the tired, even to the weak. Ula'ein Onim Atzma Gdola Yarbeh, and to those that lack strength, God refreshes them with vigor. Youth may, what's the paradigm of vigor is the youth, is young people. So young people might get old, right? Bachurim, young men, can stumble and fall, but the Kovei Hashem, those who trust in God, Yachlifu Koach, God will renew their strength. Yalu Ever Kinsharim will give them strength like the wings of eagles. Yarutsu v'lo yigo, they'll run, they'll be active, and they won't get tired. Yelchu v'lo yeofu, they march and they won't get faint. Right, and this is all part of this idea that even though it's such bleak time, there's such destruction and devastation being forecast, it's not the end of the story. The relationship isn't severed, but that God can continue, God's permanence endures. Now that's the big picture of what we're talking about in the wide stretch of Jewish history, right? But let's think about Abraham for a second, right? Abraham in our Parsha, we're introduced, is the first monotheist, right? right? Or the first Jewish monotheist. Part of the Haftorah is to fill in some of the lacuna, some of the areas that are missing of these different places that or part of the Haftorah is trying to think about, like, what does that mean that Abraham chooses God, that Lecha happens, right? One of the core questions that we ask ourselves in the Parsha is, like, what happened here, right? We know the Midrash fills in very famously the story of Abraham. There are really two different versions of it, right? You have the Rambam, Maimonides, who talks about God, about Abraham finding God through philosophy. So Abraham starts asking questions and looking at the world and says it can't be that all these things just exist and that there are all these different powers that are sort of orchestrating different things. There must be one root power, one great power, and it takes time. According to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, it takes years and years for the Rambam to for Abraham to unpack everything and come to his understanding. The Ramban Nachmanides fills in more of a narrative of what happened, right? He starts proselytizing for God in Or Kasdim. He get in trouble. He gets thrown in jail. He gets released. He runs away. He comes to Haran. Maybe gets thrown in the fiery furnace, the Kor Aish, the Kivshon Aish, the fiery furnace, and a miracle happens, and he's saved. And that's where he gets the Lecha. However it is, none of those stories are in the Torah. And so part of what this Haftorah also is highlighting for us is from creation, clearly Adam knew God. Right? One of the questions that we ask is, like, what happened? Adam knew about God. Chava knew about God. When Noah knew about God, right? So then what happened to Abraham that people lost God? So there's clearly what we'll call the early dark ages, right? The time where where we don't know what happened, right? All of a sudden it gets lost. Does God emerge on the other side of that history? Or is God sort of what we refer to as deistic, right? God sets up the watchmaker, right? God sets the watch and leaves. Nature runs its course, but God's not really pulling the string. So what does this Haftorah begin to remind us? That from Noah to Abraham, God's still there, right? If you trust with God, God gives you real strength. This sort of permanence of the relationship with God is highlighted at this stage. Continues on, Hacharishu Eli Iyim, be silent, O land, O islands before me, Ulumim Yachlifu Koach Yigashu Az, Dioberu, Lechtav Mishpat, Nikrava, right? Everyone pay attention, focus on what I'm about to say. Mi Heir, Mi Mizrach, Tzedek, who aroused from Mizrach, from the east. Tzedek has lots of different meanings in here. It could mean, according to some, like righteous, or it can mean like the victor. It could mean like a tzaddik. There are different explanations over there. Uleraglav yitain lefanav, and summoned him to do. I'm sorry. Karu leraglav, called him to God's service. Yitain lefanav goyim. Umalachim Yered Yitain Kafar Charo Ukakash, that God delivered nations before God and downtrodden sovereigns before him, rendered their swords like dust and their arrows like straw, right? So who's this referring to? Who does this sound like it's referring to? I just gave you a whole background that this is Noah to Abraham. It would seem like this is Abraham, right? Mi Heir Mi Mizrach. This is why maybe this Haftorah is even chosen for this moment. It's all about Abraham. And part of the core question we ask ourselves is, who's choosing who? Right? The story I just told you before about Abraham finding God is Abraham's choosing God. And vice versa, This is saying, no, God's choosing Abraham. God puts that into motion, right? And that's really part of the ebb and flow of Lech Lecha. It seems like the pshat, the simple explanation of the Torah without the midrash, is exactly that. And that's one context. And some people understand that as that, right? And definitely the deciders of our Haftorah are bringing this together to highlight that, to highlight this idea that Abraham doesn't just find God, God finds Abraham. The story is part of the compelling narrative of the creation of the Jewish people. Another lens, maybe in the context of Yeshayahu, what was also intended, is the question of redemption, right? What ends up bringing about redemption to the Jewish people after the destruction of the first temple? And by what, I mean who?
Sorry, say again.
By what, I mean who? Who triggers the redemption of the Jewish people in the after the first temple is destroyed? Which great king? I'll give you a hint. This starts with the same English letter that our state starts with. But it's not a K. That's a bad hint. Cyrus, Koresh, right? Koresh gives permission. Part of the narrative, the role of the prophet here is to highlight, just like Abraham, is Abraham totally on his own, or is he a messenger of God? Cyrus just someone who happens to think about policies that benefit the Jewish people? Or, as the prophet wants to cast, Cyrus is restored by God. The temple is restored by God. Cyrus is the messenger for God. Cyrus is God's puppet in a great way, in a God's, is God's agent. It's the
Rabbi,
desire.
because he allows the Jewish people to go back.
Right. The message here is that the act of Nechama by God, and Cyrus is just the messenger, right? Cyrus is the conduit, but God's the one who's bringing the people back, right? And then we sort of read back what we just said about God's power, right? Who does Cyrus worship? Cyrus worships the great god Marduk, right? Where we get the name Mordechai from, right? So the creator God, right? But what does the Haftorah set into play here? Who is God? Verse 28. Elohei Olam Hashem. God's the eternal God. Barek Sot Haaretz. Created the whole world, right? And didn't stop. Didn't run out of energy. Didn't run out of juice, right? Meaning we're bumping off not just Koresh in terms of his role as being the prime mover for the redemption, but even what Koresh says, why am I doing this, is because Marduk wants me to do this. That's not why, because God's really calling the shots, right? And all of this conversation about God being the power, again, you can easily see this on two storylines. If we're talking about the Avraham storyline, that is the debate between polytheism and monotheism. Are there other sources of strength in the world besides for God? Well, if you're a polytheist, yeah. If you're a monotheist, who really gives you strength? Not youth, not valor, not courage. God. Only God. God's the only source. That's the definition. And that's what we see over and over again. Koach. God gives you koach. Those that renew koach. Even if you're old, you can get it, right? All of that is very much the storyline with Abraham, right? All of this is setting that up. And Abraham is an example of the impossible, right? And that's the whole story. Abraham and Sarah having a child is an impossible feat, but that's the power of God, right? Abraham giving birth to a nation that matters 2,000, 3,000 years later is impossible. That's the power of God. There is no outside powers. It's only God. That's one way of reading this, right? And our Haftorah is trying to highlight that with the narrative that our Parsha is talking about. Another way of reading this, and I'm not saying they're exclusive, they're just two planes in which you read this. The other way of reading this is about Koresh. And Koresh has power, but who's really powering Koresh? Not the pantheon of gods that exists in Koresh's temple, but God. Right? And part of what Koresh's belief, part of what that Persian belief was that every nation had their God, and that God had power and needed to be respected and play nicely with everyone else. Right? This is against that. God created the world. God outlasts. God's forever. And not just was God at the beginning, God's at the end. God has total strength and doesn't get tired, and all the energy and all the vigor. And so you have exactly these pieces. And let's just continue on. Verse 2, right? What big words are we highlighting? Hold on a second. Is it verse 2? Yeah. Well, verse 2, going back, we're 41, verse 2. Kafar Cherbo, right? There's a midrash in our parsha that says that Avram didn't have military experience. He threw dirt and it fell into arrows. And when they shot dirt at him, it fell down like dust, right? Where's that midrash coming from? The language we have over here, clearly reading this storyline as a reference to Abraham. The Ibn Ezra, on the other hand, reads this on the Pshat level about Koresh, right? Koresh is the messenger of God. God is really working through Koresh. Who made Koresh so successful to conquer the Middle East, to be the ruler, the new emperor of the whole Levant? God. Exactly. Mihe Irmi Mizrach. Who aroused the victor from the east? Koresh. God did. Made all the enemies fall before him. God did. Right? So you could read this as both. Clearly, when our Haftarah is being presented like this, it's referring to, or the people who are choosing this to be our Haftarah, is clearly trying to highlight Abraham.
So, Rabbi, if we can just for a second, where is Koresh coming even into this?
Koresh is the instrument of the redemption that begins the Second Temple.
I understand, but why is you're talking about reading this in two different perspectives? One,
there's the machloket. There's a debate. Rashi says this is Abraham, and the Ibn Ezra says this is Koresh. Right? The Ibn Ezra says, I'll just read to you. Hakadmonim, the early ones, Amru kizeh remez, that this is a hint al Abraham, on Abraham. Hit gaber al malachim, that they beat the 5 kings and the 4 kings, which is a reference to our story in our parsha. The shavar tzlamim, and broke the idols. The haraya, and the proof sha'achar Sha'amar Achar Kain Zera Abraham Oavai. Because later on in this Haftarah, we're going to say, well, I love Abraham. Verse number 8. Vata Yisrael Abdi, Yisrael, you're my servant. Abraham, Yaakov Asher Becharticha, the Abraham that I chose. I'm sorry, Yaakov that I chose. Zera Abraham Ohavi, the seed of Abraham, my beloved. Right? So that's what he says. Then he continues. This is also true, meaning he's saying there's a level of interpretation. According to my understanding, remez al Koresh. This is the remez. This is a hint on Koresh. Kol parsha hi divuka. All of this is about that. The kach kasuv koreh mimizrach 8. This is another verse in Mem Zayin, and the next verse refers to that. The Acharav, he quotes other things that he thinks are all a reference to Koresh. The Parshat Kula, Mefaresh Shem Koresh. All of this is based about Koresh. And so therefore, that's what I think this is referring to. So this is debate here, Lee. What's this referring to? And what I'm saying is, even if we take the Ibn Ezra's interpretive level as pshat, as a simple explanation, part of the beauty of trimming the Haftorah the way we're getting it trimmed highlights the fact that the people choosing this also understand that you can read this as referring to Abraham. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. What I still don't understand is why anyone thinks it's referring to Koresh.
You're asking if there is anything specifically in the Haftorah that makes you think that this refers to Koresh? I mean, Ibn Ezra says, according to the rabbi, but
What happened to the rabbi?
I'm here. I just took a deep breath. I think Ibn Ezra thinks that you read this whole section, this chapter, the next chapter, with lots of references to Koresh. So then this also is Koresh.
Okay, so in not specifically in this chapter or chapters, but in previous or others.
No, in this chapter and the next chapter. This is chapter this is chapter 41. He thinks by 47 it's talking about Koresh, and some of the other ones when he groups them together.
Okay. So what is a specific example in this one that is taken as a reference to Koresh?
Mi he'ir mimizrach, who aroused Tzedek, who roused a victor from the east. Koresh is from the east and a victorious victor.
Oh.
Yikra'ehu l'raglav, called him to his service. Yitem lefanav goyim, made him victorious among nations. Umalachim yarad yitain. I'm sorry, and brought kingdoms and God and nations fall before him, meaning describing why Koresh was so successful a conqueror. Yitain kafar charbo, made his sword particularly strong. Kakash, and straw his projectiles, meaning he was very successful. Yirdafim avor shalom, he pursues them and he is safe. Orech b'raglav lo yavo, no shackle, no barrier comes to his feet. That could be Abraham pursuing the kings in the battle in our Parsha. That could be Koresh, who is miraculously victorious across the Middle East. Mipal v'asa. Who did this and this happened? Is it them that did it and this happened? Koreh darosh mirosh. Ani Hashem Rishon v'et ha'achronim anihu. I am God first, and I'm the last also. I'm really sorry. There's just an issue going on. I just need to pause. I'm sorry about that. Meaning, mi pa'al v'asa. Who caused this? Who's pulling the strings behind the curtain? It's not Koresh. It's not Abraham. It's God. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Re'u iyim v'yira'u, see, O islands, and be afraid. Kitzod haaretz, the edges of the earth, the ends of the earth, and be afraid. Everyone should come close and see. Ish ed re'eu ya'zoru. Each person is helping each other, and to their friend, they're taking courage. We're sort of, we are segueing to a new piece that's sort of going to talk about, idolatry. This is a very famous story, a very famous line, although it's one of these things that they sing very strong, but in the context here, it's actually not so good. It's people encouraging other people to do idolatry. Again, this foil to the Abrahamic story, but maybe also this foil to Koresh, that Koresh is so bought in on idolatry or in bringing everyone together that God's highlighting that. Vayechazek charash, at soref, that the workman encourages the smith, the what's it called, the someone who carves wood, the carpenter encourages the smith, the metalsmith, machli patish et holem palm, the one who flattens that patish, the hammer, encourages the one that pounds the anvil, the metal base that you smooth things on. Yomar, we say to those making the idols, la devek tofu, that to the riveter, to the one that's binding them together, tofu, it's good, it's connected well. Vayechazekehu bamas merim, that they strengthen it with nails. Masbirim are nails. Lo yimot, that it shouldn't fall over, it shouldn't come apart. Meaning they're describing in great detail the building of idols. Right? By the way, this is one, these two verses, we talk about purifying the impure. That's part of our duty as Jews, is to sanctify the mundane. So the verse number 6, which is about idolatry, has become a beautiful song that we sing. Ish et re'eu yazoru la'achiv yomar chazak. It's a very famous song. Everyone should encourage everyone else. So in this context, I think there's one commentary that says, no, this is about a mitzvah, that someone should encourage someone. These are the people, these are Abraham's descendants, or I'm sorry, Abraham's students, encouraging each other to do good. But the general understanding is not that this is about idolatry. So we sing the song. There was once this kol kore, this announcement from rabbis saying, don't sing this song. It's not a good song. Vayechazek, right? And then the other part, Yomar ladevek tofu, you say to the fixer that it's good, that it's connected well. There's some tubot or some Tanaim documents that actually have that on top of it. Say to the fixer, this is a good pair. Meaning we say that about a chatan and kala, about a bride and a groom, about a couple. But really what they're referring to over here is to idolatry, right? Say to the idol that you pair the front and the back and it looks like it's fixed well. So obviously those are two moments where we take lines that exist in other places, apply it here, and it is, we're matire, we're sanctifying it, purifying it. But Yisrael Avdi, you, Jacob, my servant, you, Yaakov, Yisrael, my servant, Yaakov Asher Becharticha, Yaakov, who I've chosen, Zera Abraham Oavi, but you, all of you, the Jewish people, in contrast to what we just said about idolatry, Asher, that I redeemed you from across the land and brought you back, V'omar lach, and I said to you, Avdi ata, you are my servant, Becharticha, V'lo ma'asticha, I chose you and I didn't reject you, right? What are we highlighting over here? That even though Koresh looks like he's on the rise, it's not that he was chosen, he's just God's messenger to highlight the fact that we're chosen, to bring us back, to redeem the Jewish people, right? And by the way, this is where the Koresh narrative might make more sense. And don't be afraid because I'm with you. Don't be frightened because I'm your God. I strengthen you. Af azarticha, I'll also help you. Af tzidki, I'll even uphold you with my victorious right hand. They will be ashamed and be embarrassed. If you remember, we saw, I forget where, in another place, the Malbim said the difference between Yuvoshu and Busha and Klima, both embarrassed and shame. And the Malbim says, I forget which one was which, but one is internal embarrassment, right? You'll be ashamed of yourself. And the other is embarrassment from other people. Others will just say, no, this is just a literary couplet. But if you remember, we saw the Malbim who says every word is significant. You'll be embarrassed internally and you'll be ashamed externally, or you'll be ashamed internally. I forget which one's which, but whatever. That it's the same idea. And they'll all be for naught. They'll seek solutions. And they'll seek to do battle, but they'll know one. Ki ani Hashem, for I am God. Machazik yeminecha, that is holding your right hand. Omer lach al tira ani azarticha, that's saying, don't be afraid, have no fear, I will help you. Right. This Haftarah goes to what? Verse 16?
Yes. No, 15 is the last.
15 is the last?
No, 16. I have 16.
16, yes, 16.
All right, fine. Al tiri'i tolat Yaakov. Don't be afraid, O worm of Jacob, which is an interesting sort of question. But again, if this is the beginning of the redemptive side, this is where people are. They're the worms. Metei Yisrael, the dead or the men or the maggots of Israel. Some people say this might mean the maggots of Israel, meaning you're in this despondent place. Ani azarticha, I will help you. Azartich, I will help you. Ne'um Hashem, the Go'alech, Kedosh Yisrael, and I will help you, for I am the Redeemer of Israel. Right? These are different types of models of redemption that we see also being presented over here. There's the model of redemption that's part of Sefer Bereshit. That's the courage of people that trust in God, that God supports, and therefore they're able to be redeemed. And then there's the model of redemption that's amplified, for example, in Shemot, where God really redeems the Jewish people willy-nilly, not because the people are courageous or able to live. And I think I just want to come back to this idea. There's this core question that we struggle with at this parsha. Who chooses who? Is God choosing Abraham, as the verses seem to highlight, right? Lecha, God calls to Abraham, and the commentators ask, why is it fair that God chose Abraham? If God told me to do something, maybe I would also. Why does Abraham get so much reward? So either we can understand by saying, no, Abraham really chose God. Abraham really chose God, right? Abraham found God. Abraham investigated philosophy, all of these different pieces. That's part one. The other piece of this comes into, so our Haftarah fills in the conversation with this, right? The Haftarah sort of highlights, no, Abraham is being chosen, being driven by God, right? It's the counterpoint to the Midrash in some ways. You have the verse, then you have the Midrash, and then you have the Haftarah. And historically, although it's hard to date Midrash, and I don't want to commit myself exactly to this, but historically, assuming the Kivshon Aish story, assuming the Rambam story is an early story, which it probably is, and I think it's even cited in the Gemara. So actually, sequentially, these are in conversation with each other. The verse describes, God tells Abraham, Lecha. Why? We don't know. Maybe God just told Abraham. I want to add, there's a beautiful Chidushei Arim, one of the Ger Rebbes. He writes, why is it fair that God called Abraham Lecha? Anyone living in Abraham's generation could turn to God and say, I don't understand. If God said to me, Lecha, I would go, and I would be the founder of the Jewish people. Abraham, Sarah, what's so special? Says Chidushei Arim, no. Lecha was said to everyone. Abraham and Sarah, just the only people who listened. It's a very powerful answer, and it's a very meaningful idea that whether that means that Abraham was able to tune in to the divine command that was emanated, or the only one that had the courage to do it. But answering or assuming a fundamental, or it's conceding a fundamental premise. Everyone should have gotten Lecha. Why is Avram special? So our Midrash comes and answers that question. Next stage after the verse, very simple. Kivshon Aish. Avram gets thrown into the fire. Al Kiyush Hashem. Avram's proselytizing. Avram finds God. Avram discovers God. Why is Avram chosen? Because Avram chooses himself. Then comes the people who choose this Haftarah to be the Haftarah for Parashat Lecha, and says, hold on a second. Let's not make God insignificant in this process. Mi he'ir mimizrach. This is all God's plan. God empowers Abraham. God gives him strength. Right? It's this unbelievable dialogue that's happening generation after generation. And where do we weigh in on it? Well, there are different answers. There are different pieces. The Haftarah is clearly highlighting one version of it. Even Ezra might say, no, that's not the real reason. This is all about Koresh. Why do we read this Haftarah? Because it's referencing. It's noting that we all play a role. You can easily, you can lowball the connection here, but it's still a very powerful connection. All right. I think that's a big piece here. I we'll stop here. That's this Haftarah for this. And we'll pick up next week.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
All right.